So, first of all, I have no slides. I'm just going to be talking to you off my script, other than my name. And that's definitely my name. So, I'm Tanya Hodcroft, and I'm really pleased to be able to come along to this event today. I've been doing stakeholder engagement in universal credit now for about 2 years. And have I learned a lot? Yes, I have. I'm not a policy person. So what I'm not going to do today is be able to change the amount of allowances you get, etc., etc. That is not my role. My role is to work with charities, financial institutions, and to be able to improve the process of universal credit by listening to what insight they have and listening to our landlords, which includes both the social sector and the private sector. What does my career look like in DWP though? I've done 25 years on frontline, so I've seen a lot of people in a lot of different circumstances. Some vulnerable, some not so vulnerable. What I will say though is actually working with members of the public is very, very much so a passion of mine. When the pandemic hit, my understanding is prior to then we had quite a good relationship with a forum of private sector landlords, but it had to stop during the pandemic. So post the pandemic, it was my job to restart those relationships. So I started with welfare rights, as I've said, financial institutions, but are now looking at broadening that engagement with colleagues like yourselves. Bruce, who's invited me here today, what I will say about Bruce is he's very passionate. He attends a monthly meeting with myself. He's even attended the meeting while he's been on holiday, which has actually very much so made me smile because he's never wanted to miss out, etc. But what I would like to say is he does represent your views. So whatever you are thinking that are problematic, please do feed them into Bruce as well, because he will speak to me on a regular basis. And what I do is I raise that with seniors within DWP. Now, I know everyone knows the word universal credit. And of course, what we do, we love it in government, don't we? We abbreviate everything, so we call it UC. So UC has been going for 10 years. I think it celebrated its anniversary in January. And by way of background, it replaces 6 legacy benefits with a single, streamlined and simplified digital system. We still acknowledge, though, that yes, we have a digital system, but there will also be people that won't be able to claim universal credit in that way. So we have put lots of steps in place to ensure we scoop those individuals up and make sure that we don't lose them through the net, so to speak. So, for example, we have a help to claim service. We work very closely with Citizens Advice so that they can actually represent the person and get those claims made. The benefits that it is taking over, and obviously the last one is the one you're going to be very much so interested, although maybe the first one too, is tax credits. Talking about that first. Tax credits is ending. By April of next year, government and HMRC will have closed the tax credit benefit system down. There will be no more claims to tax credits. Households claiming what we all used to call just JSA, but it's Job Seekers Allowance, that's its real name. That is also moving over to universal credit. Income support, so IS, that I'm sure some of your tenants might describe it as, and very much so the income-based employment support allowance too, so ESA, and last but not least is housing benefit. But there will be some exceptions to that I will come on to. currently what's happening in government is natural migration. So what will happen is that if a customer has a change of circumstances, and let's say they're on job seekers allowance, they will have to move over to universal credit if they have a change of circumstances. But the reason I wanted to come and talk to you today was very much so about move to universal credit. So that is managed migration. So taking all of those people that are still on those other benefits, moving all of the tax credit individual claimants over. That is what I'm going to talk to you about today. And what we do as part of that process is send a citizen what we call a managed migration notice. I'm going to come on to the couple of things that at the end for you to take away. But please, please, I cannot stress enough, please don't encourage your tenants to move to universal credit until we ask them to. And the reason for that is financial penalty. Because, and I will come on to transitional protection just shortly. We give a citizen 3 months to claim universal credit when we ask them to move over. So we do give them plenty of time. The rationale for that is because some people could do it right away. Some people, it would take them a little bit of time. Some people are very nervous. We know there's a trust element with universal credit, and we are trying to build that trust, not just directly working with citizens, but working with partners like yourselves. That's why you are so key to universal credit. It's a very, I'll call it an agile approach because that's the language that we use, but we are updating that universal credit system virtually on a 2-week rolling basis. So we make improvements all of the time. So I know it can feel frustrating sometimes, especially when some of the charities I work with, they'll say, oh, Tanya, can you show me that? Can I have a printout of that? And I'm like, yes, but it could change in a fortnight. So it just isn't worth then the paper that it's written on. So I always send people to the best place, which is gov.uk, to find out what the latest information is around universal credit. So we test and learn as well. So what we haven't done in universal credit is we haven't stopped testing and stopped learning. We have a variety of user researchers that go out and they deal directly with citizens and obviously directly with charitable organisations and housing associations, local authorities. We're working with those individuals on a daily basis. So I touched on the fact that if you get asked to move over to universal credit, there is something called transitional protection. And what that means is that if you were on a benefit and the amount for you to come over to universal credit was deemed as being lower, what we will do is we will top it up so that you will then still get the same level of benefit. And we call that the transitional protection. It's very complicated. We wanted it to be there so as that people had that safety net. And I think I was at something a few months ago and a member of a colleague said that there was something like 500 different scenarios of when applying for benefit as to the different rates that could come out. So you can actually see that it's complicated, and it's only complicated because of people's lives and circumstances. So we have to make sure that we scoop everyone up into the move process, but also keep them at that right level of the income that they had coming in previously. Hence why I'm saying to you, please don't rush to your tenants and say, all of you need to move over to universal credit because you're going to be told to. Just ask them to move when we actually say. We've moved a lot of citizens so far, And what we will be left with come the autumn time, well, it is autumn, isn't it, really, especially with the rain that I had coming up from Stoke-on-Trent yesterday. We will be left with something like 800,000 individuals to move over in the last 12 months of the migration. And they will be employment support allowance citizens. So we could deem them as a very vulnerable group. Some of them do have vulnerabilities, some of them don't. Some of them, it is pure a health condition, but they could have both. So let's move on to housing benefit migration. So we started that in July of this year. And a good example of whereby when I'm describing this agile process of we reiterate every 2 weeks is that we wanted to start housing benefit in June, but actually we delayed it because there was further automation we could have put in the system that would actually stop individuals having to supply quite as much information to DWP. So we just stalled it just for a couple of weeks so as we could make sure we could get these housing benefit individuals transitioning safely. Some, though, on housing benefit won't move, and they would be individuals, for example, in supported accommodation. So it's not as clear cut as everyone in housing benefit will move, and of course we will still have pensioners there too. When a person does move, what they will get at the moment, if they're on tax credits, is a tax credit closure notice too. And the reason we've had to make sure we do that is because, and it's not been known to me in the how many years have I been here? 37 years, whereby we actually have pensioners on a working age benefit. So we will have pensioners now claiming universal credit. Now, the rationale for that is because some of those pensioners are still working. And if they're still working, then universal credit is the better route. We can't force someone, but actually monetary-wise, they would be better with the allowances that you get on universal credit than pension credit. So we didn't want people, again, actually losing out. So if you do hear that, oh, there's pensioners on universal credit, yes, that's right. But it's because they're actually still in that labour market and working. And it surprised me, to be honest, as to how many pensioners we had who still had children and were still claiming child tax credits. And I was like, goodness me, that is, you know, it's quite a surprise, really, to be honest. I had my children early. I was definitely not going to be a pensioner. But anyway, we do have citizens in that situation, so to speak. So what changes have we made since we started moving people over to universal credit? From listening to people like yourselves, people like charities, housing associations, etc., we've made some real-time changes both to the system, to how we educate our staff as to what guidance is out there, and also what products that we send out to citizens. We've really had our listening ears on. So we have made some real time changes in the 2 years that I've been doing this work. We've also, though, had some really complex issues to resolve. And some of those, for example, are around very recently working with Marie Curie and Macmillan around people who might be at end of life, for example. So there's some sensitive areas of moving these citizens over from one benefit to another. We're always seeking feedback. As I've said, if you think that there's something, I've had some great feedback in the room today around some of our processes, which I'll come on to specifics around housing, etc., just in a moment. But please do feed anything you have into Bruce. I can promise you Bruce will pass it on. How are we promoting this? Promoting feels like not the right word because, you know, we don't sell anything, do we? Definitely not. But we need to get the message out. So by getting the message out, we've been using radio. It's always quite interesting. My husband's a long-distance lorry driver, and he works just nights. And he heard the radio ad before I did. And I'm like, what are we doing playing it in the night? What are we doing that for, you know? But actually, it's great that he came home the next morning and said, I've heard your advert. I said, my advert? He says, yeah, I've heard that Smooth Radio advert. Again, it's trying to get people to move and move across as safely as possible. Apparently, we run the advert in all Asda stores across the country. I've not heard it in my Asda yet, but I obviously just haven't been in there at the right time. But you can see how we are trying to promote to make sure that people move across safely. So what are we doing to make sure that some of these people, though, have the right support? Because I've talked about people that could be vulnerable. I've talked about people who have complex needs, that they could have end-of-life issues. What we do is we work very closely with we call them our complex case team and our advanced customer support team, so that if, say, for example, you'd got a tenant and they were getting very close to their 3-month period, we would be looking at that system and looking at how can we involve a visiting officer, how can we involve an advanced customer support person, so as to get that individual to move over. The last thing we want is A, to see people without money, and B, to see people without a roof over their head, which of course is the consequence if they start getting that housing element of universal credit or any other benefit. So I just wanted to give some assurance that we are also supporting the most vulnerable in society. So what's important to you? Well, I know what's important to the people in the room. It's how the rent is paid. And we can request a managed payment for a landlord, and that's called the alternative payment arrangements. It can be done by the benefit recipient, or it can be their landlord. I've had a conversation today with a letting agent who says, you know, it's frustrating for me because I'm doing the business for the person, but actually it's the landlord that's got to do that. Unfortunately, with GDPR rules as they are in its law, that has to be the process. But how can you get into the department? So the citizen can use their online account. The journal, we say, is the best way forward. They can talk to the work coach or case manager, or they can phone our universal credit telephone line, which I'll make sure that the line is there for you to send out, Bruce. If the landlord's making the request, it's called apply for a direct rent payment service. I'm sure some of you may have done that. If you haven't, what I've got out there, as I haven't got a stand, by the way, it's just Liam and I, who's one of my colleagues sitting there, and we can give you some appropriate links to the gov.uk website, so as at least you'll know how to be able to do that. We know that, and Bruce tells me all of the time, that actually there are some real problems with getting a managed payment. You know, he talks to me on a constant basis, and we've received a lot of feedback around managed payments. So what are we doing about that at the moment? Well, we're running some trials at present, but that's with our social sector housing, so the bigger organisations. But Bruce doesn't know this yet. But when we meet, I don't know if it's next week or the week after, I want a couple of private sector landlords to come and join that trial to look at how can we improve that process. We've even looked at the form that you have to fill in already, so as we could say, it was quite astounding to me that we asked for a date of birth. You can put the wrong date of birth and it still goes through. Why does that happen? That should not be happening at all. So there are improvements that DWP can make. So last but not least, it's just a couple of pleas from me, really. Winter fuel allowance. I know it's in the press. I know every time I open the BBC News on my phone, it's actually there. The biggie for me around winter fuel is, and this is nothing to do with the managed move of universal credit, but please, please do encourage anyone that you know that is a pensioner to apply for pension credit. My own parents, who have been refusing to claim pension credit, and I didn't know whether they'd be eligible. 2 weeks ago, I managed to coax them to do a calculation on the gov.uk site with me sitting with them. And it worked out at £3.75 a week. And of which my dad was fuming, and he was, it doesn't mean anything to me, Tanya, that doesn't. I said, yes, but it's the passported benefits. It's the other doors that it actually opens. So, for example, you would then be entitled to winter fuel payments too in the next 12 months. So if you have any relatives, I know it's very topical at the moment, but I wanted to just bring it to life with my own personal experience. Please get people to claim. I went with the advice of the Martin Lewis website, and he said, if you've got an income of less than 40,000, claim it, let them turn you down. So that's my advice to people in the room and when you're talking to relatives. So what am I going to leave you with? If you've got a citizen that really has a migration notice, they don't know what to do, please get them to talk to us. Please don't tell them to wait, but please don't push them to claim universal credit until they have that migration notice. And then last but not least, tax credits is closing. So those individuals you've got in your properties that are claiming tax credits, that system closes on, I think it's the 5th, it's either the 5th or the 6th of April 2025. So it will not exist post that date.